The transport shuttle moved slowly through space toward the massive station that hung in orbit around a giant gas planet. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window and watched as the Galactic Defense Academy grew larger. The station looked like a city made of crystal and metal, with tall towers that caught the light from distant stars. Ships of all sizes moved around it like busy insects. Jake had been traveling for 3 weeks to get here. Earth was far away now, just another small dot among billions of stars. He was the first human ever invited to attend the academy. The letter had arrived at his military base 6 months ago, written in perfect English, but signed by aliens he had never heard of. The shuttle docked with a soft bump. Jake picked up his gray duffel bag and walked toward the exit. His uniform was simple compared to what he had seen on the other passengers during the journey. No fancy armor, no glowing weapons, no strange devices attached to his body, just plain gray cloth and black boots. The docking bay doors opened with a hiss. Jake stepped out and immediately felt different. The gravity was lighter than Earth normal. The air smelled clean but strange, with hints of ozone and something like flowers. Lights that had no obvious source illuminated everything with a soft blue glow. Other new cadets were already gathering in the center of the bay. Jake had never seen aliens in person before. The sight made him stop and stare for a moment. 3 Velkari stood together near an information display. They looked almost human, but taller and thinner, with dark purple skin that seemed to shimmer. Their eyes were bright yellow and much larger than human eyes. They moved with quick, precise gestures as they talked in voices that sounded like musical instruments. A group of rodents dominated one corner of the bay. They were built like walking mountains, easily 8 feet tall and covered in what looked like gray stone instead of skin. Their faces were hard and angular, with small eyes that glowed red in the dim light. When they spoke, their voices rumbled like distant thunder. Near the far wall, several Zephyrians stood in complete silence. They were tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and no visible hair. Their heads were larger than human heads, with smooth features and eyes that seemed to look right through everything. Jake realized they were probably talking to each other using their minds instead of their voices. A few other species moved through the crowd. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange Jake could not figure out how they moved or breathed. All of them carried equipment that looked far more advanced than anything he had ever seen. Jake walked toward the registration area, trying not to feel out of place. A few aliens glanced at him as he passed. Their expressions were curious but not unfriendly. He heard whispers in languages he did not recognize. The registration desk was staffed by a Velkari female with intricate patterns tattooed on her arms. She looked at Jake with those large yellow eyes and spoke in accented but clear English. "Name and homeworld," she said. "Jake Morrison, Earth," he replied. She consulted a floating display that appeared in the air above her desk. Her expression changed slightly as she read. "Ah, yes, the Terran. You are assigned to Delta Squad, Barracks Level 7, Section 12. Your squad leader orientation begins in 1 hour." She handed him a small device that felt warm in his palm. "This will guide you to your quarters and provide schedule updates." Jake thanked her and followed the device's directions through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The academy was huge, with thousands of rooms connected by moving walkways and transport tubes. Cadets and instructors filled the passages, representing species from across the galaxy. He found his quarters easily enough. The room was simple but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and storage area. A large window looked out at the gas giant below, its swirling clouds painted in shades of orange and red. Jake unpacked his few belongings and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt truly alone. Everyone here had abilities he could not match. They were stronger, faster, smarter, or had powers that seemed like magic. What could one ordinary human contribute to an academy that trained the galaxy's best warriors? A soft chime indicated someone was at his door. Jake opened it to find two aliens standing in the hallway. The first was a rodent female, shorter than the ones he had seen in the docking bay, but still imposing. Her stone skin had patterns of silver running through it like veins in marble. The second was a young Zephyrian male with kind eyes and a slight smile. "You are the human," the rodent said. Her voice was softer than he had expected, but still powerful. "I am Kira. This is Zane. We are your squad mates in Delta Squad." Zane nodded politely. "We wanted to meet you before orientation begins. We have heard much about your species, but have never encountered a human before." "Nice to meet you both," Jake said. "I have to admit, this is all new to me too. I have never been around aliens before today." Kira looked him up and down with obvious curiosity. "You appear very fragile. Your skin looks thin and soft. Do you have any natural armor or defensive abilities?" "No natural armor," Jake admitted. "Just what you see." "Fascinating," Zane said. "Our instructors mentioned that humans have no enhanced physical capabilities, no psychic abilities, no extended lifespans. Yet your species was invited to join the academy. There must be something special about you." Jake was not sure how to respond to that. He had wondered the same thing during the long journey to the academy. His test scores had been good but not exceptional. His military record was solid but unremarkable. He was just a regular soldier from a small planet that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. "I guess we will find out," he said finally. The three of them walked together toward the orientation hall. Along the way, Kira and Zane explained some of the academy's basic structure. Cadets were organized into squads of 3 or 4 members, usually from different species, to encourage cooperation. The training lasted 2 years and covered everything from individual combat to fleet tactics to diplomacy. "The Academy has trained officers for over 300 years, Zane explained. "Graduates serve in the Galactic Defense Force, protecting member worlds from threats both internal and external." "What kind of threats?" Jake asked. "Hostile alien species from outside our sector, rogue planets that refuse to follow galactic law, pirates, slavers, and occasionally civil wars between member worlds," Kira said matter-of-factly. "The galaxy can be a dangerous place." They reached the orientation hall just as the session was beginning. Commander Vextai, a tall Velkari with elaborate rank insignia, stood at the front of the room addressing the new cadets. His voice carried easily through the large space. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy. You represent the finest young warriors from 12 different worlds. Over the next 2 years, you will be tested, trained, and transformed into officers worthy of defending galactic civilization." His yellow eyes swept across the assembled cadets and paused when they reached Jake. The commander's expression was neutral, but Jake caught a hint of skepticism. "Some of you come from warrior cultures with proud military traditions. Others possess natural abilities that make you formidable in combat. A few of you represent species new to our alliance." His gaze lingered on Jake for a moment longer. "All of you will be judged by the same standards. Excellence will be rewarded. Failure will result in dismissal." The commander went on to explain the Academy's rules, schedule, and expectations. Jake listened carefully, taking notes on his datapad. Around him, other cadets did the same, though many seemed to absorb the information effortlessly. When orientation ended, Jake walked back to his quarters with his squad mates. The corridors were quieter now as cadets settled in for their first night at the academy. "Tomorrow we begin actual training," Zane said. "The first test is the Shattered Maze. It is designed to evaluate spatial reasoning and teamwork. Most squads require 8 to 10 hours to complete it," Kira added. "The record is 4 hours and 17 minutes, set by an all-Zephyrian team using telepathic coordination." Jake nodded, already wondering what challenges awaited him. He was here to represent humanity, but he still was not sure what that meant. All he could do was his best and hope it would be enough. As he lay in bed that night, looking out at the alien stars, Jake thought about home. Earth seemed very far away, but the memory of why he had come here remained clear. Humanity had been given a chance to join something bigger than themselves. Whatever happened in the days ahead, he would not waste that opportunity. The Academy's tests would begin soon, and Jake Morrison was ready to show the galaxy what one human soldier could do. The alarm sounded before dawn, filling the corridors with a sharp electronic tone that seemed designed to wake the dead. Jake rolled out of bed and quickly got dressed in his training uniform. Outside his window, the gas giant below was still dark, lit only by the distant light of twin stars. He met Kira and Zane in the mess hall for a quick breakfast. The food was strange but filling, with flavors he could not identify. Around them, other squads ate in nervous silence. Today was the first real test. "The Shattered Maze has been part of Academy training for over 2 centuries, Zane explained, between bites of something that looked like blue fruit. "It changes constantly, so no two groups face exactly the same challenge?" Kira nodded, her stone features serious. "The maze uses energy barriers and gravity fields to create obstacles. Most species struggle because it challenges their natural advantages." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "Velkari rely on their quick reflexes and tactical thinking," Zane said. "But the maze moves faster than even they can process. Rodents use their strength to overcome obstacles, but you cannot punch an energy barrier. My people coordinate telepathically, but the maze blocks our mental connections." Jake listened carefully, trying to understand what they would face. It sounded like the maze was designed to level the playing field by removing each species' natural gifts. That might actually work in his favor, since he did not have any special abilities to lose. They finished breakfast and reported to the testing facility. The building was enormous, with corridors that seemed to stretch in impossible directions. Jake felt a strange, pulling sensation as they walked, as if gravity was not working quite right. Commander Vexatai waited for them in the briefing room, along with other squad leaders and academy instructors. His yellow eyes moved across the assembled cadets with cold calculation. "The Shattered Maze will test your ability to work together under pressure," he announced. "You will navigate a 3-dimensional puzzle that changes as you move through it. There are no weapons, no communication devices, and no outside help. Success requires teamwork, spatial reasoning, and adaptation." He gestured to a large display screen that showed a complex diagram of interconnected passages and chambers. "The maze has 17 levels connected by transport nodes. Your objective is to reach the center chamber and activate the completion beacon. Most teams require 8 to 12 hours. The current record is 4 hours and 17 minutes. Jake studied the diagram carefully. It looked like a combination of a building and a machine, with passages that curved in ways that hurt his eyes to follow. Energy barriers blocked some paths, while gravity fields twisted others into impossible shapes. "Questions?" Commander Vextai asked. A Velkari cadet raised her hand. "Are there any restrictions on movement methods?" "Use whatever means you find effective, as long as all squad members reach the objective together." Another cadet, this one a massive rodent, asked about time limits. "Is there a maximum duration before failure?" 24 hours. Teams that exceed this limit are disqualified from the academy." Jake felt his stomach tighten. 24 hours seemed like a long time, but if most teams needed 8 to 12 hours, there was not much room for error. "Delta Squad, you are assigned to Maze Configuration 7. Report to entry portal 12 in 10 minutes. They walked through more corridors until they reached a circular chamber with a single doorway that glowed with soft blue light. Through the opening, Jake could see what looked like a tunnel that curved away into darkness. "Remember, Kira said, checking her equipment belt. "We stay together no matter what happens. The maze is designed to separate squads and pick them off one by one." Zane closed his eyes for a moment, testing his telepathic abilities. "Mental communication is already becoming difficult. The maze's psionic dampening fields are stronger than I expected." Jake had no special equipment to check and no enhanced senses to test. He just looked at his squad mates and nodded. "Ready when you are." They stepped through the portal together. The first thing Jake noticed was the way gravity seemed to pull in multiple directions at once. The tunnel they entered curved upward, but walking on what should have been the wall felt perfectly normal. Behind them, the portal had already disappeared. "The passage splits ahead," Kira reported, her enhanced vision allowing her to see farther than the others. 3 directions, each blocked by different types of barriers." They reached the junction and stopped to examine their options. The left passage was blocked by a wall of crackling energy that sparked dangerously when Kira approached it. The right passage curved downward into what looked like a gravity well that would trap anyone who entered. The center passage appeared clear, but felt wrong somehow, as if the air itself was hostile. "Standard protocol suggests we map each option systematically," Zane said, consulting a small device that showed tactical data. "Test the barriers, calculate risks, choose the safest path." Jake studied the 3 passages more carefully. Something about the whole setup bothered him, but he could not identify what. The barriers looked real enough, but there was a pattern to their placement that seemed too convenient. "How long have you been watching the maze?" he asked his squad mates. "What do you mean?" Kira replied. "Since we entered, you have been looking at the obstacles and trying to figure out how to overcome them. But what if we are thinking about this wrong?" Zane looked puzzled. "I do not understand. This is a navigation puzzle. We must find the correct path through the maze." Jake walked closer to the energy barrier on the left. Instead of trying to find a way around it, he studied how it moved. The crackling energy followed a specific pattern, pulsing every few seconds in a rhythm that reminded him of breathing. "It is not just a barrier," he said slowly. "It is responding to us." He moved to the gravity well on the right and watched how the distortion changed as he approached. The field shifted and twisted, but not randomly. It was reacting to their presence, adapting to counter their movements. "The whole maze is alive," Jake realized. "It is not a puzzle we solve. It is a system that learns from us and changes to stay one step ahead." Kira looked skeptical. "How can you be certain?" Instead of answering, Jake did something that made both his squad mates step back in alarm. He walked directly toward the energy barrier that should have killed him instantly. But he did not try to force his way through or find a gap in the field. Instead, he moved with the rhythm of the energy pulses, stepping forward when the field weakened and pausing when it strengthened. To his squad mates, it looked like he was dancing with the barrier itself. The energy parted around him like water around a stone. "Impossible," Zane whispered. "The barrier should have stopped you completely." Jake turned back to them with a strange smile. "It did stop me, but it was programmed to stop alien abilities, not human intuition. Come on, I will show you the way through." What followed was the strangest navigation either Kira or Zane had ever experienced. Instead of mapping passages and calculating routes, Jake led them through the maze by reading its patterns and moving in harmony with its changes. When they encountered gravity fields that should have trapped them, Jake found the timing to step through safely. When energy barriers blocked their path, he discovered the rhythm that would let them pass. When the passages themselves began shifting and changing, he anticipated the movements and guided them to safety. "How are you doing this?" Kira asked, as they climbed through a section where the walls had become the floor and gravity pulled sideways. "I am not fighting the maze," Jake explained, pausing to study the way light reflected off the changing surfaces. "I am working with it, Every system has patterns, even adaptive ones. You just have to stop thinking like it is your enemy and start thinking like it is a partner in a very complicated dance. Zane was having trouble accepting what he was seeing. Our tactical databases contain no references to this approach. It should not work. Maybe that is why it does work, Jake said. The maze was programmed to counter every known tactical approach. But humans do not always think tactically. Sometimes we just trust our instincts and see what happens. They continued deeper into the maze, moving through passages that defied logic and physics. Jake led them past barriers that should have been impossible to cross and through sections where the architecture itself seemed to bend reality. Other squads had been in the maze longer, but Jake could hear them struggling in distant passages, their enhanced abilities useless against challenges they could not overcome through pure strength or telepathy or speed. Delta Squad reached the center chamber in 97 minutes. The completion beacon was a simple crystal that pulsed with soft light. Jake reached out and touched it, feeling a brief warm sensation as the maze registered their success. Around them, the constantly shifting walls became still. The energy barriers faded away. The gravity fields returned to normal. For the first time since entering, the space felt truly quiet. Maze Configuration 7 completed, a mechanical voice announced. Time, 1 hour, 37 minutes. New Academy record. Kira and Zane stared at Jake in amazement. They had just broken a record that had stood for over 50 years, and they had done it by following the guidance of the one squad member with no enhanced abilities. The monitoring systems must have malfunctioned, Zane said, still struggling to process what had happened. No team has ever completed the maze in under 4 hours. But Jake was looking around the chamber with thoughtful eyes. I do not think the systems malfunctioned. I think the maze just encountered something it was never designed to handle. What do you mean? Every other species that comes through here has specific advantages, Jake explained, so the maze adapts to counter those advantages. But humans do not have any special abilities to counter. We are just adaptable. They found the exit portal and stepped back into the normal corridors of the academy. Commander Vextai was waiting for them with a collection of other instructors, all looking at data displays with expressions of confusion and disbelief. Cadet Morrison, the commander said, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake with new interest. Explain your navigation method. Jake thought for a moment before answering. I stopped trying to beat the maze and started trying to understand it. Instead of fighting the obstacles, I worked with them. Instead of forcing my way through barriers, I found their rhythm and moved when they were ready to let me pass. The instructors exchanged glances. Several of them were taking notes on floating displays. This approach is not found in any tactical database, one of them said. How did you develop it? I did not develop it, Jake replied honestly. It just felt like the right thing to do. Commander Vextai studied the maze completion records on his display. In 300 years of academy training, no cadet has ever achieved this result using intuitive methods. Your species may possess capabilities we had not considered. As they walked back to their quarters, Kira and Zane peppered Jake with questions about his navigation technique. He tried to explain, but realized that what had felt natural to him was completely alien to their way of thinking. You did not calculate probabilities or analyze threat patterns, Zane said, still puzzled. You just trusted your instincts and somehow knew the correct path. Sometimes that is all you can do, Jake said. When logic does not work, and strength does not work, and speed does not work, you have to try something else. That evening, as news of Delta Squad's record spread through the academy, Jake lay in his bed looking out at the alien stars. He was beginning to understand why humanity had been invited to join the galactic community. It was not because humans were stronger or smarter or more advanced than other species. It was because they brought something completely different to the table. Something that could not be programmed or predicted or countered by adaptive systems. the ability to find solutions that should not exist. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Jake felt a quiet confidence growing inside him. The galaxy was about to learn what human intuition could accomplish when everything else failed. The combat simulation arena was the largest training facility in the academy. Jake stood at the edge of the staging area, watching as massive holographic projectors created an entire alien city around them. Buildings rose from the floor, streets formed between them, and two artificial suns appeared overhead, casting harsh shadows across the urban landscape. "Today you face real opposition," Instructor Thielris announced to the assembled squads. The tall Zephyrian's mental voice reached every cadet simultaneously, speaking in their own languages. "Each squad will fight to control key positions while eliminating enemy forces. Victory goes to the team that holds the most strategic points when time expires." Jake looked across the staging area at their opponents. Alpha Squad was legendary among the cadets, led by Torvek, a massive rodent whose stone skin could deflect energy weapons that would destroy buildings. His squad included two Velkari specialists, whose tactical abilities were discussed in academy textbooks, and a Zephyrian coordinator who could link their minds for perfect battlefield awareness. Alpha Squad had never lost a combat exercise. "They have every advantage," Zane whispered, his telepathic abilities picking up nervous thoughts from other cadets watching the setup. "Torvek is virtually indestructible. The Velkari can process tactical data faster than our computers. Their Zephyrian provides psychic coordination we cannot match." Kira tested her equipment harness, checking the energy weapons and defensive systems provided for the exercise. "Our only hope is to avoid direct confrontation and rely on speed and positioning." Jake studied the city layout on his tactical display. 5 strategic points were marked: a communications tower in the center, 2 defensive positions on high ground at opposite ends of the city, and 2 resource depots in the lower districts. Standard tactics would involve securing defensive positions first, then controlling the high-value targets. "They will take the high ground immediately," he said, watching Alpha Squad examine the same tactical displays. "Torvek will position himself where he can cover the maximum area with his weapons. The Velkari will coordinate overlapping fields of fire. Their Zephyrian will monitor our movements and relay information instantly. Then we should move fast and take the objectives they cannot cover," Kira suggested. Jake shook his head slowly. "That is exactly what they expect us to do. Every academy manual recommends the same basic approaches: secure defensive positions, establish communication lines, advance in coordinated formations." "What else is there?" Zayn asked. "These are proven tactical principles used by every successful military force in the galaxy." Jake was quiet for a moment, studying not just the city layout, but the way Alpha Squad was preparing for battle. Their movements were efficient and coordinated, following patterns that had been perfected over generations of warfare. Every decision they made was logical, calculated, and tactically sound. "What if we did everything wrong?" he said finally. Both his squad mates looked at him with confusion. "I mean it," Jake continued. "What if we ignored every tactical principle and did exactly what no military manual would ever recommend?" "That would be suicide," Kira protested. "There are reasons why certain tactics work and others do not." "Are there?" Jake asked. "Or are those reasons only true when you are fighting opponents who think the same way you do?" The starting signal echoed across the arena. All squads had 10 minutes to reach their initial positions before combat began. Alpha Squad moved immediately toward the high ground, just as Jake had predicted. Their movements were textbook perfect, with Torvek taking point while the Velkari specialists provided cover. Their Zephyrian coordinator maintained mental contact with all team members, allowing them to respond to threats before they fully developed. Delta Squad headed in the opposite direction, moving into the lower city where the buildings were smaller and the streets more narrow. "We are abandoning the high ground," Zine pointed out, his tactical training making him uncomfortable with their position. "The high ground is where they expect us to be," Jake replied. leading them through a maze of alleys that provided no clear lines of sight. They have positioned themselves to counter traditional assault patterns. Kira was scanning for enemy movement with her enhanced senses. I can see Alpha Squad setting up defensive positions on the North Ridge. Perfect overlapping coverage, mutual support, clear fields of fire. They are ready for anything we might try. Are they ready for nothing? Jake asked. The combat phase began with a loud tone that echoed off the simulated buildings. Immediately, tactical displays showed Alpha Squad controlling the two high ground positions and beginning their advance toward the central communications tower. Jake led his squad deeper into the lower city, moving through areas that offered no tactical advantage. They passed several resource depots without attempting to secure them. They ignored defensive positions that would have provided excellent cover. They moved through streets where they would be vulnerable to attack from multiple directions. Our tactical readouts show Delta Squad in the Western District, the monitoring systems announced to Academy instructors watching the exercise. Current position offers no strategic value. Commander Vexatai studied the displays with growing puzzlement. What is the human attempting? His squad is exposing themselves to every possible attack vector. But Jake was not randomly wandering through the city. He was studying Alpha Squad's patterns, learning how they thought and moved and reacted. Every time he led his squad into what should have been a vulnerable position, Alpha Squad adjusted their formations to counter the threat they expected to develop. The problem was that no threat ever developed. Delta Squad would appear in a location that demanded tactical response, then disappear before Alpha Squad could engage them. They showed up in places where they should have tried to establish defensive positions, then left without claiming any territory. They are making no attempt to secure objectives, Torvek rumbled to his squad mates, his massive frame positioned to cover 3 different approaches to the communications tower. Their movement patterns make no sense. The Velkari specialists were running constant analysis on Delta Squad's positions. Their behavior does not match any known tactical doctrine, one reported. They appear to be moving randomly. But it was not random. Jake was deliberately doing everything that conventional tactics said was wrong, forcing Alpha Squad to respond to threats that never materialized. Every time they adjusted their positions to counter his movements, he changed direction and forced them to adjust again. Alpha Squad's perfect coordination began to break down as they tried to respond to an enemy that refused to follow logical patterns. They are overthinking this, Jake told his squad mates as they moved through a section of the city that was completely exposed to attack. Alpha Squad is so well trained that they cannot help but respond tactically to every situation. But what happens when the situation makes no tactical sense? 20 minutes into the combat exercise, Alpha Squad controlled 4 of the 5 strategic objectives but had never actually engaged Delta Squad in direct fighting. Their positions were perfect for defending against conventional assault, but Delta Squad kept appearing in places where conventional assault was impossible. We need to force them into direct confrontation, Torvek decided, his tactical mind struggling with an enemy that would not fight properly. Maintain positions at the communications tower and North Depot. I will advance and engage them directly. This was exactly what Jake had been waiting for. As Torvek moved away from his perfect defensive position to hunt for Delta Squad in the lower city, Jake finally made his first real tactical move. But instead of attacking the objectives Alpha Squad still controlled, he led his squad directly toward Torvek's new position. You are engaging their strongest fighter in direct combat, Kira protested. His armor can deflect any weapon we carry. I am not trying to defeat him, Jake explained as they moved through the streets. I am trying to confuse him. The confrontation came in a narrow alley between 2 tall buildings. Torvek appeared at one end, his massive form nearly filling the space between the walls. His weapons were charged and ready, his stone skin gleaming in the artificial sunlight. Jake stepped into the open and raised his hands in surrender. "What are you doing?" Torvek demanded, his deep voice echoing off the walls. "Surrendering," Jake said simply. The rodent warrior paused, his tactical training providing no guidance for this situation. Enemies were supposed to fight or retreat, not surrender in the middle of combat exercises. "This is not proper combat protocol," Torvek said, unsure how to proceed. "I know," Jake replied. "Do you accept my surrender?" While Torvek struggled with this unprecedented situation, Kira and Zane moved around behind him through passages he had not thought to watch. Within seconds, they had secured the resource depot he was supposed to be protecting. "You used surrender as a tactical distraction," Torvek realized, his respect for the human growing despite his frustration. "I used confusion as a weapon," Jake corrected. "You are trained to respond to attacks, retreats, flanking maneuvers, and defensive actions, but nobody trained you to handle an enemy who surrenders at the wrong moment." The exercise continued for another hour, but Alpha Squad never recovered their tactical balance. Every time they tried to implement proper military strategy, Delta Squad did something that made strategy irrelevant. They attacked when they should have defended, retreated when they should have advanced, and ignored objectives they should have secured. By the time the exercise ended, Delta Squad controlled 3 strategic points to Alpha Squad's 2, despite having inferior equipment and abilities. The arena fell silent as the results were announced. Alpha Squad had lost their first combat exercise ever, defeated by tactics that should not have worked against any competent opponent. Torvek approached Jake after the simulation ended, his massive stone features showing confusion and grudging respect. "Your strategies made no logical sense," he said. "Yet you achieved victory. How is this possible?" Jake looked up at the alien warrior who towered over him. "Because you were fighting the wrong enemy." "Explain." "You were fighting against military tactics and proven strategies. You positioned yourselves to counter everything the Academy taught you to expect." "But I was not using Academy tactics. I was just doing whatever felt right in the moment." The Velkari specialists joined the conversation, their yellow eyes bright with curiosity. "Random actions should not defeat coordinated strategy. There must be some underlying pattern to your behavior." "Maybe the pattern is that there is no pattern," Jake suggested. "You spent the entire exercise trying to predict what I would do next. But what if I did not know what I would do next either?" Instructor Thielris had been monitoring the exercise from the observation deck. Now he descended to speak with both squads directly. "In 3 centuries of Academy training, we have never seen tactical doctrine defeated by pure improvisation," he said, his mental voice carrying undertones of amazement. "Cadet Morrison, explain your strategic framework." "I do not have one," Jake admitted. "I just tried to do things that would make Alpha Squad uncomfortable and uncertain. Every time they adapted to counter my actions, I changed what I was doing." "But how did you choose your actions?" the instructor pressed. "There must have been some decision-making process." Jake thought for a moment before answering. "I tried to think about what would be the most confusing thing to do in each situation. Then I did that." The Academy instructors exchanged glances. They had spent centuries developing sophisticated tactical doctrines based on logic, mathematics, and proven military principles. The idea that someone could achieve victory by deliberately ignoring all of those principles was difficult to accept. "Randomness should not defeat preparation," one of the Velkari specialists insisted. "Superior strategy combined with better coordination should always prevail." "Should it?" Jake asked. "Or does it only seem that way because you have always fought against enemies who thought the same way you do?" That evening, as news of Alpha Squad's defeat spread through the Academy, Jake sat in his quarters thinking about what had happened. He had not won the exercise through superior strength or speed or intelligence. He had won by being unpredictable in a galaxy where everyone expected predictability. The other species had evolved specific advantages that made them excellent warriors. But those same advantages also made them think in specific patterns. When faced with an enemy who did not follow those patterns, their advantages became weaknesses. Kira and Zane found him on the observation deck, looking out at the gas giant's swirling clouds. The instructors are calling it the most significant tactical development in Academy history, Zane reported. They want to study your methods and incorporate them into the curriculum. That would not work, Jake said. The moment you turn improvisation into a system, it stops being improvisation. Kira settled beside him, her stone features thoughtful. You have shown us something important today. We have been so focused on perfecting our natural abilities that we forgot there might be other ways to achieve victory. Every species in the galaxy has something they excel at, Jake agreed. But maybe humanity's gift is not having any single thing we are best at. Maybe our strength is being able to adapt to anything. As they sat together watching the alien stars, Jake realized that his time at the Academy was teaching him as much about humanity as it was about the galaxy. Humans were not the strongest or fastest or smartest species, but they might be the most unpredictable. In a universe where everyone played by the same rules, sometimes the biggest advantage was not knowing the rules existed. The psychic crucible stood at the center of the Academy's psychological testing facility, like a metallic sphere covered in thousands of small nodes that pulsed with soft blue light. Jake had heard other cadets talking about this test in hushed voices during meals and training sessions. It was designed to probe the deepest fears of each species and measure their mental resilience under extreme stress. The crucible has broken stronger minds than yours, human, warned Cadet Nixara, a Velkari whose purple skin bore the ritual scars of a warrior caste. It shows you things that will make you want to surrender to madness rather than continue existing. Jake studied the sphere through the observation window. What kind of things? For my people. It creates scenarios where logic fails and our tactical thinking becomes useless, Nixara explained. We see puzzles that cannot be solved, patterns that make no sense, situations where our enhanced reasoning becomes a trap. Zane nodded grimly from beside them. Zephyrians experience complete psychic isolation. We are shown futures where we are cut off from all mental contact forever, existing alone in our own minds with no connection to others. Rodents face molecular dissolution, Kira added, her stone features unusually somber. We see our bodies breaking down at the atomic level while we remain conscious and aware. Our greatest strength, our physical immunity, becomes meaningless. Jake listened to their descriptions while watching other cadets emerge from the crucible chamber. Most looked shaken and pale. Supported by medical technicians who checked their vital signs and mental stability, a few had to be carried out unconscious. What does it show humans? He asked. That is what the Academy wants to discover, said Instructor Velana, approaching their group. The Zephyrian psychologist was tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to look directly into a person's thoughts. Your species is new to our records. We have no reliable data on human fear responses or psychological breaking points. She led Jake toward the preparation chamber, where technicians attached monitoring devices to his temples and chest. The equipment felt cold against his skin, and he could see readouts displaying his heart rate, brain activity, and other biological functions. The crucible works by interfacing directly with your neural pathways, Velana explained as the technicians worked. It identifies your deepest fears and creates scenarios designed to overwhelm your mental defenses. Most cadets reach their breaking point within 2 hours. The record for endurance is 5 hours and 12 minutes, achieved by a rodent who eventually succumbed to complete psychological collapse. What happens if someone breaks? Jake asked. Immediate medical intervention and psychological rehabilitation. Some cadets recover fully within days. Others require months of therapy before they can return to training. A few are permanently damaged and must leave the academy. The technicians finished their work and stepped back. Jake's biological readouts appeared on multiple displays around the chamber, showing steady heart rate and normal brain activity. "Are you ready?" Velana asked. Jake took a deep breath and nodded. The chamber door opened, revealing the crucible's interior. It was smaller than he had expected, barely large enough for one person to stand comfortably. The walls were covered in the same pulsing nodes he had seen from outside, and the air hummed with energy that made his skin tingle. He stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake stood in the center of the sphere, surrounded by gently pulsing lights that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. Then the first projection began. He was standing on Earth, but it was not the Earth he remembered. Cities burned beneath a red sky while massive alien ships rained destruction on everything below. The air smelled of smoke and death. In the distance, he could see familiar landmarks melting under energy weapons that turned matter into plasma. His heart rate increased as the scenario developed. He watched his hometown disappear in a flash of light. The academy where he had trained before leaving Earth crumbled into ash. Everyone he had ever known was gone, killed because humanity had been foolish enough to venture into space and attract the attention of hostile aliens. The projection felt completely real. He could feel the heat from the burning buildings, taste the ash in the air, hear the screams of the dying. But Jake forced himself to remember that this was not real, just a test designed to measure his psychological response. The scene shifted. Now he was floating in space, watching Earth's sun collapse into a black hole that consumed his entire solar system. The last traces of human civilization disappeared into infinite darkness, and the universe continued as if humanity had never existed. Outside the crucible, Velana watched Jake's biological readouts with growing interest. His heart rate had increased slightly, but his neural patterns remained stable. Most cadets showed signs of psychological stress within the first few minutes. The projections continued, each one more devastating than the last. Jake witnessed scenarios where his actions led to the extinction of the human race, where everyone he cared about died because he had failed to protect them. He experienced isolation so complete that he forgot what other people looked like, loneliness so profound that he began to question whether he had ever truly existed. 1 hour passed. Jake's readouts showed elevated stress responses, but no signs of mental breakdown. The crucible intensified its assault, creating scenarios specifically designed to exploit human psychological vulnerabilities. Jake found himself trapped in situations where he had to choose between saving loved ones, knowing that any choice would result in suffering. He watched himself become a monster who destroyed everything he touched. He experienced failure so complete that even the memory of hope became painful. 2 hours passed. Jake was sweating and his hands trembled slightly, but his mind remained intact. "This should not be possible," Velana muttered, checking her equipment for malfunctions. The psychological pressure at this level should have broken any known sentient species. She increased the crucible's intensity beyond normal testing parameters. The chamber filled with projections that attacked every aspect of human existence. Jake experienced the heat death of the universe, watched reality itself dissolve into meaningless chaos, felt consciousness expand until it encompassed infinite suffering across all possible timelines. 3 hours passed. Jake's biological systems showed extreme stress, but his neural patterns indicated he was still psychologically functional. The projections became increasingly desperate, as if the crucible itself was frustrated by its inability to break this strange alien mind. It showed Jake hells designed by 1,000 different species, torments that had shattered the strongest warriors in galactic history, fears so primal that they transcended species boundaries entirely. 4 hours passed. Jake remained standing in the center of the chamber, tears streaming down his face but his spirit unbroken. Velana was frantically consulting her databases, trying to understand what she was witnessing. "His fear responses are completely normal," she reported to Commander Vextai, who had arrived to observe the unprecedented test duration. "He is experiencing terror, grief, despair, and horror at levels that should cause immediate psychological collapse. But he continues to function." "How is this possible?" the commander asked. "I do not know. His mind is processing the fear scenarios normally, but something is preventing them from overwhelming his consciousness." Inside the crucible, Jake was indeed experiencing every emotion the projections intended to create. He felt terror at the scenarios of Earth's destruction, grief for the deaths of people he loved, despair at his own failures, and horror at visions of infinite suffering. But he did not try to fight these emotions or pretend they were not real. Instead, he acknowledged each fear as it came and continued to exist alongside it. When shown Earth burning, he felt the grief, but did not let it stop him from standing upright. When faced with his own failures, he accepted responsibility, but did not surrender to despair. When confronted with infinite loneliness, he held on to the memory of human connection, even while experiencing complete isolation. The crucible had been designed to break minds by overwhelming them with fears too powerful to endure. But Jake was not trying to endure the fears. He was simply carrying them and moving forward anyway. 5 hours passed. Jake's biological readouts showed exhaustion and extreme stress, but no mental collapse. The crucible began cycling through fears at maximum intensity, throwing everything it had at this impossible human mind. Jake experienced every possible form of suffering, watched every conceivable disaster, felt every variety of loss and failure and horror. And still, he stood. 6 hours passed. Velana was consulting with Academy psychologists from every species, trying to understand what they were witnessing. "The human mind appears to have a completely different relationship with fear than any other known species," she reported in amazement. "Where we resist or flee from psychological trauma, he simply accepts it and continues functioning." Inside the chamber, Jake was beginning to understand something important about the nature of fear itself. The projections were designed to be unbearable, to create psychological pressure so intense that surrender became preferable to endurance. But humans, he realized, had been living with unbearable things for their entire evolutionary history. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and famines by learning not to overcome suffering, but to carry it and keep going anyway. The ability to function while afraid was not a bug in human psychology. It was a feature. 7 hours passed. The crucible's projections were becoming repetitive, as if it had exhausted its database of fears and was now recycling previous scenarios with minor variations. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, battered by visions of horror but still psychologically intact. His body was exhausted and his emotions raw, but his mind remained clear and functional. "Enough," Commander Vextai finally ordered. "Terminate the test." The projections faded away, leaving Jake alone in the chamber surrounded by softly pulsing lights. The door opened and medical technicians rushed in to check his condition. "How do you feel?" Velana asked as they examined him. Jake thought for a moment before answering. "Scared," he said honestly, "but not broken." They helped him to a medical bay where doctors from multiple species examined him thoroughly. His body showed signs of extreme stress, but his psychological state remained stable. "Explain what you experienced," Velana requested when the medical examination was complete. "Everything you intended me to experience," Jake replied. "Fear, grief, despair, horror, loneliness, all of it." "Then how did you survive when stronger minds have broken under less pressure?" Jake was quiet for a long time, trying to find words for something he had never had to explain before. "I think you are asking the wrong question," he said finally. "You want to know how I defeated the fears. But I did not defeat them. I just carried them and kept going." "I do not understand." "Fear is not something you beat," Jake explained. "It is something you live with. Humans have been doing that for thousands of years. We are afraid of death, but we keep living. We are afraid of failure, but we keep trying. We are afraid of being alone, but we keep reaching out to each other." Velana studied him with her large, penetrating eyes. "Other species either overcome their fears or are paralyzed by them. You suggest a third option." "Acceptance," Jake said simply. "The fears were real, even if the scenarios were not. I felt everything the Crucible wanted me to feel. But feeling afraid does not mean you have to stop functioning. It just means you function while afraid." Word of Jake's performance in the Crucible spread quickly through the Academy. 7 hours of maximum psychological assault without mental breakdown was unprecedented in the facility's history. That evening, as Jake sat in his quarters recovering from the ordeal, Kira and Zane visited to check on his condition. "The instructors are calling it impossible," Zane reported. "No known species should be able to withstand that level of psychological pressure without some form of mental enhancement or psychic shielding." "Maybe humans do have mental enhancement," Jake suggested. "Maybe we just do not recognize it as such, because it is so basic to how we think." Kira looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Every other species seems to treat fear as something that needs to be eliminated or overcome," Jake explained. "But what if fear is not meant to be defeated? What if it is meant to be a companion that warns you about danger while you do what needs to be done anyway?" That night, Jake lay in bed thinking about the day's test. The Crucible had shown him genuine horrors, and he had felt genuine fear in response. But he had also discovered something important about human nature. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was the presence of fear combined with the decision to act anyway. The galaxy was learning that humans possessed something unique among all the species in the Academy. Not the ability to avoid psychological trauma, but the ability to function effectively while carrying it. In a universe where rational beings surrender when the odds become impossible, humans represented something unprecedented, a species that defined impossible as just another word for difficult. Director Keth Moros had ruled the Galactic Defense Academy for 4 centuries. He was ancient even by Zephyrian standards, with pale blue skin that had faded almost to white and eyes that held memories of wars fought before most current species had achieved space travel. In all his years of training warriors from across the galaxy, he had never encountered anything quite like the human cadet. The reports on his desk told an impossible story. Jake Morrison had broken navigation records that had stood for decades, defeated the Academy's most elite combat squad using tactics that should not work, and survived psychological assault that had broken seasoned veterans. Each individual achievement was remarkable. Together, they suggested something unprecedented. "I want to see what we are dealing with," Keth Moros announced to his senior staff during their morning briefing. "Deploy the Omega Protocol." The room fell silent. Commander Vexatai looked up from his tactical displays with obvious concern. "Director, the Omega Protocol has never been used on a cadet. It was designed as a final evaluation for graduating officers who have completed 2 years of intensive training." "I am aware of its intended purpose," Keth Moros replied calmly. "But standard testing protocols appear inadequate for evaluating this particular cadet. I want to understand what human capabilities actually represent." Instructor Velana, still analyzing data from Jake's performance in the Psychic Crucible, voiced her own concerns. "The Omega Protocol is designed to demonstrate grace under impossible pressure. It assumes psychological failure rather than testing for it. If the human's mental architecture is truly as unusual as our tests suggest, the results could be unpredictable. That is exactly why we need to conduct this evaluation, Keth Moros said. Arrange for the test immediately. 2 hours later, Jake found himself standing in the Academy's largest combat arena. The space was enormous, capable of generating entire battlefields complete with terrain, weather, and thousands of simulated enemies. Around the observation deck, Academy staff gathered to witness what many expected would be Jake's first genuine failure. Director Keth Moros himself descended to the arena floor to brief Jake personally. The ancient Zephyrian moved slowly but with obvious authority, his faded blue features bearing the weight of centuries. "Cadet Morrison," he said, his mental voice carrying undertones of curiosity and respect. "You have performed admirably in your previous evaluations. Today, however, you face something different. The Omega Protocol is not designed to test whether you can succeed, but rather how you conduct yourself when success becomes impossible." Jake listened carefully as the director explained the scenario. He would be placed in command of a defensive position with orders to protect a civilian evacuation. Enemy forces would attack in overwhelming numbers with superior equipment. His own resources would be limited and would fail systematically as the exercise progressed. "The simulation will continue until you surrender, retreat, or suffer complete tactical collapse," Keth Moros explained. "Most experienced officers last approximately 15 minutes before rational assessment compels them to acknowledge defeat." "What if I do not surrender?" Jake asked. The director studied him with ancient eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "Then we will discover something interesting about human nature." Jake entered the simulation chamber and immediately found himself standing on a fortified wall overlooking a valley filled with evacuating civilians. Families moved in long columns toward transport ships that would carry them to safety, but the evacuation was proceeding too slowly. Enemy forces had been detected approaching from multiple directions. His equipment consisted of a single energy rifle, basic communications gear, and a defensive position that could be held by no more than 3 soldiers. Intelligence reports indicated enemy strength at over 10,000 troops, supported by heavy armor and air support. Any reasonable tactical assessment suggested immediate retreat. The simulation began with distant explosions as enemy artillery found range. Jake checked his equipment and established communication with the evacuation coordinators below. "Evacuation status?" he requested. 40% complete, came the reply. "We need at least 2 more hours to get everyone to the transport ships." Jake looked across the valley at the approaching dust clouds that marked enemy advance forces. 2 hours was impossible. His position could not hold for 2 minutes against the forces being deployed against him. He decided to try anyway. The first wave of enemy troops crested the ridge line as a mass of armored vehicles and infantry that stretched across the entire horizon. Jake opened fire with his energy rifle, targeting command vehicles and communication equipment rather than trying to kill individual soldiers. His tactical display showed the approaching force in stark detail. Over 3,000 troops in the first wave alone, with heavier forces following behind. His single rifle could not possibly stop them all. Within minutes, his weapon began to overheat from continuous fire. The cooling system failed completely, leaving him with a rifle that could only fire in short bursts before becoming dangerously unstable. In the observation deck, Academy instructors watched with growing amazement as Jake continued fighting despite the obvious futility of his position. "His equipment is failing exactly as programmed," Instructor Thielris reported. "But he is adapting his tactics to compensate rather than acknowledging the hopeless nature of his situation." Jake had stopped trying to kill enemy soldiers and was instead focusing on disrupting their coordination. He targeted communication arrays, disabled vehicles that were directing troop movements, and used the terrain to create choke points that slowed the advance. It was not stopping the enemy, but it was buying time for the evacuation. His communication equipment failed next, cutting him off from the evacuating civilians below. He could see the transport ships still loading refugees, but he had no way to coordinate with them or receive status updates. Enemy forces reached the base of his fortification and began scaling the walls using equipment designed specifically to overcome defensive positions. Jake abandoned his rifle when it finally overheated completely and began using debris from damaged fortifications as improvised weapons. "He is fighting with rocks," Commander Vextai observed incredulously. "His position is completely compromised, his equipment has failed, and he is outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Why does he not surrender?" Director Kethmoros watched the impossible scene with growing fascination. "Because surrender is not in his programming." Jake's defensive position collapsed under sustained assault. Enemy troops overran the fortification and surrounded him completely. According to every military doctrine in the Academy's databases, the exercise should have ended with his capture or tactical withdrawal. Instead, Jake grabbed an enemy weapon and continued fighting. What followed violated every principle of rational military behavior. Instead of accepting defeat when his position became untenable, Jake carried the fight directly to enemy formations that should have overwhelmed him instantly. When surrounded, he attacked. When outnumbered, he advanced. When his weapons failed, he improvised new ones from battlefield debris. The simulation's computer systems began registering errors as they struggled to process responses that did not match any known tactical doctrine. Jake's character died and regenerated repeatedly, but each time he resumed fighting as if death itself was just another obstacle to overcome. "This is impossible," Velana whispered, studying the psychological readouts from Jake's neural interface. "The scenario is designed to demonstrate acceptance of inevitable defeat. His mind should be recognizing the mathematical impossibility of success." But Jake was not thinking mathematically. He was thinking about the civilians still evacuating below, the families that needed time to reach safety, and the promise he had made to protect them, regardless of the cost. 3 hours into the simulation, something unprecedented occurred. Jake's character achieved tactical objectives that the scenario had deemed impossible. Through sheer persistence and absolute refusal to acknowledge defeat, he had single-handedly delayed enemy forces long enough for the civilian evacuation to complete successfully. The Academy's computers registered this as a system malfunction. "Simulation terminated," announced the automated systems. "Error in tactical parameters detected." Jake stood in the center of the arena, sweating and exhausted but still ready to continue fighting. Around him, the simulated battlefield faded away, leaving only the empty chamber and the stunned silence of Academy staff. Director Kethmoros descended to the arena floor, his ancient mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. In 4 centuries of military training, he had never seen anything like Jake's performance. "Cadet Morrison," he said, his mental voice carrying undertones of amazement. "Explain your tactical reasoning during that engagement." Jake thought for a moment before answering. "There were people who needed protection. Everything else was just details to work around. But success was mathematically impossible. Any rational assessment would have indicated immediate strategic withdrawal." "I know," Jake replied simply. "But the people evacuating did not care about mathematics. They just needed someone to buy them time." Commander Vextai joined the conversation, his yellow eyes bright with curiosity. "You continued fighting even after your position was overrun and your equipment had failed. Most rational beings would have accepted defeat at that point." "Maybe," Jake said, "but I was not trying to avoid defeat. I was trying to complete the mission." "Even when completion became impossible?" Jake looked around at the assembled Academy staff, representatives of a dozen species who had evolved specific advantages and rational approaches to warfare. "You keep using that word," he said. "Impossible. but humans do not really understand what it means. Director Keth Morrow studied the human cadet with eyes that had witnessed the rise of galactic civilization. Explain. Every species here has natural advantages, Jake said, gesturing toward the observation deck where alien instructors watched in fascination. You are stronger or faster or smarter or have special abilities that make you excellent warriors. But humans evolved on a planet that was trying to kill them every single day. He paused, trying to find words for concepts that had never needed explanation before. We survived ice ages and predators and plagues and famines by learning one basic skill: how to keep going when everything logical says you should quit, not because we are tougher or braver or smarter than other species. Because we never learned that there was an alternative to continuing. Valana stepped forward, her pale blue features showing deep concentration. You are suggesting that human psychology is fundamentally different from other known species. I am suggesting that humans do not believe in losing, Jake corrected. We believe in not winning yet. When every rational option is exhausted, when defeat is mathematically certain, when hope itself becomes impossible, humans find a way to continue. Not because we expect to win, because giving up is not in our vocabulary. The Academy fell silent as the implications of his words settled over the gathered staff. What is humanity's greatest weapon? Director Keth Moros asked finally. Jake looked around at the representatives of advanced civilizations. Each evolved for specific strengths. Each adapted for particular advantages. We refuse to quit, he said simply. When superior technology fails, when tactical genius is not enough, when natural advantages become irrelevant, humans are still there, still fighting, still trying to find a way forward. Not because we are optimistic about our chances, but because surrender is not a concept we understand. The ancient director considered this for a long moment. In his centuries of training warriors from across the galaxy, he had seen courage and determination and tactical brilliance, but he had never encountered a species that simply did not recognize defeat as a valid option. Recommendation for Academy records, Keth Moros announced to his staff. Immediate alliance with Terran Federation. Assessment note, humans do not fight to win. They fight because the alternative is unthinkable. As news of Jake's performance spread through the Academy, cadets and instructors began to understand what they had witnessed. The galaxy's military academies had been training warriors to win for centuries, but humans represented something unprecedented. Warriors who could not lose because they did not understand how to stop. 3 months later, Jake graduated as the Academy's most decorated cadet. But more importantly, his presence fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about warfare itself. The Academy's motto, unchanged for 3 centuries, was quietly updated. Where it once read, "Victory through superior capability," it now read, "Victory through unbreakable will." As Jake prepared for his first assignment with the Galactic Defense Force, Director Keth Moros offered him a final piece of wisdom. You have shown us something remarkable, young human. Your species does not just resist defeat. You make defeat impossible by redefining what victory means. Jake shouldered his equipment bag and prepared to leave the academy that had become his home for 2 years. What did you learn about yourself during your time here? The director asked. Jake thought about the navigation tests that had taught him to work with impossible systems, the combat exercises that had shown him the power of unpredictability, the psychological trials that had revealed the strength in accepting fear, and the final demonstration that had proven humans could succeed by simply refusing to fail. I learned that impossible is just another word for difficult, he said, and that the universe does not care about fair fights. It only cares about what you do when everything tells you to quit. He paused at the Academy's exit, looking back at the institution that had trained the galaxy's finest warriors for centuries. That is when you find out who you really are. As Jake departed for active duty, The Academy's instructors began developing new training programs based on human military philosophy. Courses in tactical improvisation, psychological resilience under impossible odds, and the strategic value of absolute refusal to surrender. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. Humans were both.